For those who don't know, my name is Trevor Avery. I'm the director of the Lake District Holocaust Project. We've been carrying out this work, believe it or not, will be 15 years next year, 2005. We began, really it was about this place, Calgarth Estate. If you go to the Lake School, right about a mile out of Windermere, you will see a secondary school and open fields, because there's nothing on the surface above ground that remains of Calgarth Estate. But it was where the workers from the nearby Short Sunderland factory, look, the guys came up with their families from Rochester, from Birmingham, from Coventry, and they all came and they had to build a special housing scheme for them to put them up. And then a remarkable turn of events. 1945, the war was over, no need for further Short Sunderland aeroplanes or flying boats. And the single workers, those workers who had arrived without their families, not necessarily unmarried, but those guys who came unattached, there were 300 of them. And they all stayed in dormitories, each had their own individual room. So those guys went home. Meanwhile, the houses that were surrounding the hostels were 200. The families remained there. But somebody somewhere in the Defence Ministry in London, when an inquiry came saying, does anybody know anywhere where we can put up 300 children who are coming from the concentration camps? We need somewhere to put them up in the UK. Does anybody know anywhere? And some rather wonderful nameless guy who we don't know said, oh yes, we can put 300 of them up in a place called Ambleside near Windermere. And that's where our name from Auschwitz to Ambleside comes from, even though the fact is we are based in Windermere. So the children arrived and stayed there. It's often been said for just 2 months, but actually we now know that the last of them, they arrived on August the 14th, 1945, but the last of them actually left in the middle of January, 46, so they were quite a substantial amount of time. So we began to, when somebody said to me quite sort of casually, of course you know, this is where the children from Auschwitz came. And I'd said, well, you don't hear that every day. What was this about? And I asked around locally. I was living here in Kendal. Nobody knew this story until I went back to re-talk to a lot of people who do it at Calgarth, and they said, oh yes, we remember them. So the next step was to find some of these children and some of these children and carers who'd been here. Now we were, as you could tell, we were pretty remote from the north of England, surrounded by lakes and mountains and not much else, so we didn't know where to begin. Until a colleague, Rosemary, contacted the Jewish Museum in London, and they said, oh, you need to talk to Mr. Ben Helfgott. And around the same time, a friend of ours in Bowness, Susan Katz, said, oh, I know where some of them live in Manchester, we'll arrange for you to meet some. And that was the beginning of the journey. I talked to Ben, and then I spoke to 3 of what we know as our Manchester boys. Jack Eisenberg, Maya Hirsch and Sam Laskier. I met them at the Midland Hotel in Manchester, and I thought it was just for a couple of hours, but I looked recently on my diaries from the time, and I actually met them at 10:30 in the morning. When I tell you that I caught the train back at 4 in the afternoon, that's how much time I'd spent with them. But in my mind, it flew. We were there for a couple of hours. For most of that time, it was just fun, and it was laughter, and it was humour, and it was joking. And I thought I'd entered a parallel universe, because my expectation was, I had talked to survivors before, but not in a group like this, and certainly not an extraordinary group like this. I thought, this isn't how it's meant to be. These are supposed to be survivors, the Holocaust, you know. The final half an hour, I said, look, I'm going to have to go get a train. Can I tell your stories? Can I come and talk to you? Oh yes, we'll help you. Anyway, anything you want, you can ask us. Because they said, because of Windermere. So it then became quite sad, it's fair to say, that final half an hour, but they said, we'll help you all that we can. And they have ever since. So we have, what you see here is ostensibly the story of the factory in Calgarth, the community here. We have the story of the boys, the children, the girls that came here. Now this is just a shop window. We have an enormous archive behind the scenes of material that we've accumulated over the years. We've travelled to Piotrków, Shiraz, Warsaw, a lot of places where the boys have come from and the girls. We've tracked a lot of those places down. We've visited the places you don't really want to visit, but some of the places where their families probably went to inevitably in the end. And we've had the great good fortune, because of when we started, of being able to talk to a lot of these children, these boys and these girls. And it's fair to say over time, we've become, myself and Rosebery and people, we've become very close friends to them. And crucially to their families and to their families. So it's become a big event, big project for us. But that's a brief bit of the background. I can't tell you how, the two things, I wasn't going to say anything, but I will. I'm so pleased to see Robbie here today. Robbie's father, Sam Gontage, gave a talk here, excuse me, a year ago. Sam Gontage was a very, very, very special man, a very special friend to us. And we miss him. He passed away not so very long ago at all. And seeing Robbie here and his family, it makes me feel like Sam's here. But now I want to welcome Ike Alterman, who I've known for a good many years, but I can't tell you how fortunate I feel to have him sitting here in the Lake District Holocaust Project, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his story, which I think will include Windermere at some point, but also will touch on, I'm sure, the place next door. The photographs are on the wall, which Ike recognised immediately. So thank you for your indulgence, and Ike, do you want to begin?
Well, what here begins? Sorry about that. Things don't work.
It's not at my age either.
Thank you. Yes. Right. My name is Ike Alterman. Ike to my friends. The reason why I've changed that is because a lot of people couldn't pronounce Ike Alterman. So I've changed it to this. I was born in a place called Ożarów, my mother's hometown in southeast Poland in 1928. I had an older sister and a younger brother. I remember that my father had the first motorized taxi in the town. The car had big horn on the driver's side of the car, and I loved to hoop. Oh, I mean, going back 75, maybe 80 years, And it's still with me. It's still with me there. When I was still very young, we moved to my father's hometown, which is called Auschwitz, which was approximately 25 kilometers away from my mother's hometown. Father started to work in the family business. He had several brothers who were running the business, and my grandpa, he was very, very religious. All he was doing at the time was studying the Torah, the scripture. That's all he wanted to live for. A wonderful man. As well as working in the family business, my father would go to Warsaw to buy parts and bring them back home to assemble and sold racing bikes from our front room. The wheels were wooden wheels. Why? Because these were specifically made for racing. And the continent at the time, most of the countries were racing bikes. The wheels were wooden, so the bikes would be very light in weight, and the tires were stamped Made in England. That's all I could read. I didn't know what that meant. Actual fact, made in England. Life was reasonably good for us, but I missed my grandfather and my uncles and aunties on my mother's side. They lived in Auschwitz, obviously. Sometimes I would run away from home and hitch a lift with a man who had a horse and a little cart, who used to travel between Auschwitz and Auschwitz every day, picking up passengers. And he used to give me a lift. Never used to charge me anything, not that I had any money. And the family, unfortunately, were going berserk because I disappeared, didn't know where I was. And in those days, people didn't have telephones. The only place we could let them know when I arrived in my mother's hometown is to go to the post office who had one telephone. And they got in touch with a telephone in Auschwitz, my father's hometown, and somebody would let them know that I'm safe and well. I'm in Auschwitz. We used to have take a hitch and do. I felt so happy and welcomed there. So much love for me from my mother's family, unlike in my father's family. The only way to let my parents know where I was, somebody would ring them. I was safe. Okay. As a little boy, I started Hebrew school at 3 years old. I hated it. And very often my father dragged me through the streets and I was shouting and screaming and crying. Children then started the Polish school at 7 years old. And I only had 2 years of secular schooling. The war broke out and that was it. My grandfather in Auschwitz, on my father's side, was a very religious man, as I said. And he spent his days studying the Bible, whilst his 4 sons run the family business. Every Saturday afternoon, I had to go to my grandfather's house to recite to him how well I had learned the weekly scripture. That was a tradition. I was petrified in case I made a mistake. I can recall that the rabbi was a teacher. The Jewish school was very poor. In order to skip classes and him not inform my parents that I was scarred, I used to walk the streets picking up cigarette dips to bribe him. From which he retrieved the tobacco and rolled his own cigarettes. People used to be very, very poor in those days. Everything changed in September 39 when war broke out. All Jewish businesses were closed and work, food, education were restricted. A ghetto was formed in 1941 in a small area of the town around where we lived. More and more people arrived from local towns. There were around about 16,000 people there at any one time. German soldiers raided the ghetto regularly and took away some of these people. They were never seen again. I can remember that the Ukrainian soldiers were even worse than the Nazis. They carried out the Nazis' orders with such excitement and would lash out and shoot people for no reason, just to add to their enjoyment. In 1942, all Jews in town were ordered to report to the square of the town. We were allowed to take with us only what we could carry in our hands. Everything else had to be left. We were lined up around the square, 4 or 5 rows deep, and we were kept standing for hours, fearful of what was awaiting us. We didn't know what was coming. I was standing behind my father, who told me to stand on my tiptoes so that I looked older and taller. My mother, sister, and little brother were standing next to my father. The German officer started to count. The count arose and stopped between my father and my mother. All those to the left of my father were marched out of the square, followed by guards with rifles. That was the last I saw of my mother. Rumor has it that they were all transported to Treblinka to be exterminated. My father and I were sent to work in the brickworks, and we slept on straw on the floor. I was only 13 years old, and life had changed beyond all recognition. One day, there was a raid on the ghetto. I was separated from my father then, and transferred to Blizhin. That was my first concentration camp, all on my own. If I thought the ghetto was bad, I was in for a real shock. In the camp there were many appels. It means we were all lined up in the open air in whatever weather, including middle of the night. We left to stand for hours while the Nazis did a roll call. Sometimes the terrible conditions, we were told that if we had any valuables, jewelry, money, gold teeth, we had to give it up. If we didn't give things up, we would be shot. I was put to work in the kitchen, cleaning everything, including the big cooking baths they had there. Peeling potatoes, cleaning and all that. This was quite a fortunate job to get, as it meant I was protected from the outside elements. Those doing labor outside did not fare as well. However, despite this, I developed typhus. And one day, while I was delirious, I found my way to the kitchen and confronted the German officer. He was dressed in his all his regalia, including his revolver. And I approached him and I asked him for his revolver. He started screaming, "Was? Luckily for me, a Jewish capo, policeman, he intervened, pointed to my head, indicating that I was crazy and didn't know what I was saying. That was a very lucky escape for me, because he could have just pulled the trigger without any hesitations. In 1944, Ford was transported from Blishin to Auschwitz and then marched to Birkenau. The following morning I was tattooed. My number is B1209 on my arm. I didn't have a name then. That was my number. It was there that I saw an aunt of mine overlooking our section into the women's. And she informed me about my father. She told me he had been there the day before where I stood. But he had been sent to Buna works, where he, like many others, were worked to death. I never had the opportunity to see him again. The Buna works were also known as Auschwitz III, or Monowitz. The SS would earn 3 Reichsmarks a day for each slave that they could get to work. The life expectancy an inmate working outdoors was about 1 month. Those who were worked indoors do not know when my father died or how he was killed. Sometime later I was picked to work in a small farm which provided food for the officers and guards around Auschwitz and Birkenau. The morning before Christmas, we were sent out in the bitter cold to pick sprouts. The snow was that deep. For the officers, for Christmas dinner. We had no proper shoes or warm clothes to wear. The snow was very deep and we were frozen to the bone. In the evening, the German political civilian who was in charge of our barrack ordered us to sit on our bones and sing Silent Night to him. Repeat that. Heilige Nacht, Ruhe Nacht, alles Ruhe, alles wach. We received a ladle of water with a couple of sprout leaves floating in it. That was our bonus, Christmas bonus. Yes. Needless to say, I have never been able to face sprout to this day, as it brings back all the bad memories. In January 1945, it was becoming obvious that changes were afoot. We had no idea that the Russians were approaching, but the Nazis' guards they're acting differently. One day, 6,000 prisoners, myself amongst them, were taken on what is now called the Death March. We left Auschwitz a couple of days before it was liberated by the Russian army. What a bitter pill that was. All those left behind were freed just 2 days later, whilst we were dropping like flies on Death March. We marched through the deep snows. Anyone who couldn't keep up was shot on the side of the road and left. Only a few hundred survived, and we ended up in Buchenwald, concentration camp in Germany. In the middle of April, we were loaded onto open cattle trucks with 4 guards with guns, one on each corner of each cattle truck, and were transported. We journeyed wherever the train could go, as a lot of the railway lines were being bombed by the Allies. On the 8th of May, we arrived outside Theresienstadt, yet another camp. Many people died on the route, and those who were still alive were due to go to the gas chambers the following day, myself included. The Nazis' plan was not to be as the war had ended that day, and the Russian army were marching to liberate Prague because there was an uprising in Prague. They heard about our transport, and the battalion was sent to liberate the transport and the whole of the concentration camp. The 4 guards on each wagon disappeared suddenly, and miraculously we were free. I remember not knowing what the word free meant, as I had not tasted freedom in so long. Theresienstadt was a military town. Those of us who were well enough were put in the barracks that had been built to host the Czechoslovakian army in the late 19th century. Those who were too sick were looked after in a nearby hospital or large manor homes, taking over the house by the sick and the dying. The Russian soldiers were a funny bunch. Despite their brown grey coats, most of them had never left the Russian villages before being drafted to war, and the funniest things excited them. I can remember that watches were their most coveted treasure. The bigger the watch, the grander. They'd never seen watches before that. They would capture as many Nazis as possible, and the first thing they would take would be the watch. Then they would gleefully open their overcoats and show their friends a lining full of watches. They would then drink their vodka and dance the traditional Russian Kosatsky dance whilst playing their accordion. When we were first liberated, they gave us 24 hours to leave the camp and do whatever we wanted. Take revenge on any Germans we found, take whatever food we wanted, or any spoils we could find left by the Germans. One of the boys, who later came to England in this transport, returned from his day out with a half a piglet wrapped round his waist. He must have got in at a farm, somewhere like that. Incidentally, this boy is still alive. He's emigrated to Canada. Yes. It was hastily shared out between many desperately starving mouths. Most of the boys became very ill as the meat was just too rich for their starving bodies. As youngsters, we were only interested in food. Some of the older inmates were a little wiser. In fact, I remember one of them, a fellow called Newman, who spent his day collecting as many pieces of gold and jewelry he could find. He came to England a rather wealthy man. I spent my time of being a typical teenager. I ventured into a park in Theresienstadt and found a bottle of vodka. Thinking it would both quench my thirst and heal my body and soul, I drank some. Being so thin, it did take long for it to take effect. I returned to the camp running around the barrack like a headless chicken, not realizing that some of the dignitaries had the right to view the survivors and the condition we were in. I still chuckle about my time in today. Very few spent their time taking revenge. I remember thinking I was not going to lower myself to such animalistic behavior. I had survived and focused on continuing to do so. The Jewish Refugee Committee approached the British government and asked if they could bring over some orphaned children to England. Permission was given to bring 1,000 children. They had to be under the age of 16. The Jewish Refugee Committee were to be responsible for all our needs. You would think that was a great achievement, but would you believe that they only managed to find 732 children? Hitler and the Nazi regime had done a good job making sure there were not many left. None of the survivors had any papers to prove our age, so some of us gave false states to enable us to be eligible for transportation. 3 months later, I was on the first transport of 300 children flown out of Prague in the Lancaster bombers, destination Carlisle, England. When we arrived in Carlisle, we were taken into an airport hangar where tables were set with plates of bread with butter and jam and tea with milk. Something we never had at home, but soon got used to it. Within minutes, the plates were empty, as we had stuffed the food into our pockets. As for so long, we never knew when we would have another piece of bread. We were driven to Windermere and taken to a campsite on the edge of the lake. The campsite was built at the beginning of the war for the workers, short brothers. When war ended, they vacated the site. We thought we were in paradise. We were each taken to a chalet, given a room with our own bed, with sheets and a pillow, showers without water and proper loos. The next morning we showered, put on our new underwear and new clothing. We were taken to the central hall where we said our prayers and breakfast was served. Food of the likes that we hadn't seen since before the war. We couldn't believe our eyes at all the food, and it took us time to stop stuffing our pockets as soon as we saw food. Our minds were still fearful. And worried where the next meal would come because of the fear we had in the camps. All the staff, many of whom were locals, were friendly and helpful and caring for us. And I know that they were shocked at our appearances and terrible sad, and they saw how stark we were, and the survival tactics that had become normal life for us. We started to learn to live again. Many boys went to swimming in the lake. We played football. We were taken on the steamers in the lake, and there were outings to Bowness and other parts of the Lake District. We learned to explore the area. We went to the cinema, and we walked for miles in freedom. What a wonderful time that was. Because of the loss of our families, we started to gel with one another and create friendships. We were alone. We were alone in the world, and all we had was each other. However welcoming and helpful the British staff were, they didn't have an inkling about what we had been through. We could not talk to strangers about what we went through. Well, I'm getting near to the end. We had lived through, it was too raw. We couldn't only talk to each other about our terrible experiences and loss of our loved ones. We supported each other as we tried to slowly rebuild our lives despite the haunting memories that stay with us always. We will be forever in debt to all those people who helped us to adjust to normality. We were known as the Holocaust surviving children. Later that was shortened to the boys. We are still simply known as the boys. I am still in close contact with my friends. They are all over the world, in Canada, Israel, and other countries. We have an unbreakable bond, having survived the worst example of human behavior that this world has seen. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ike. I'd like to immediately throw it open to if anybody here does have any questions for Ike or before I tell anybody any questions. I'm aware that it's an awful lot to take on board.
Thank you.
It's an awful lot to take in, certainly for people who haven't heard a survivor talk before. I've heard an awful lot, and it's a little bit easier, but it's not the easiest experience. What I've realised over time is I think as Ike said there, when I first began to meet the guys, I had this name, Holocaust survivor, just loomed large in my head. But over time I've realised it's a name, but each of them has their own story. It's a generic name, but Holocaust survivor is a term we have to use. We use it in this, but I often think that it's only when it becomes personalised that you realise what went on. And there are moments which I'd like to share, because Fiona's here and I, where recently we were in Prague in May, earlier this year, and it was to recreate a famous photograph of the boys in front of a memorial in the old square in Prague. And there were a few of the boys and girls there, and a lot of their families had flown from around the world to be there to represent their fathers and represent their grandfathers. And I went there as was invited by the 45A Society. But the most moving part for me was the night before, because I went for a meal, for a quiet meal with Ike and Ivy and his family in Prague. And one thing that he probably doesn't realise, but when we walked, and I said to him, and remember the very next morning, the photograph was going to be recreated. And I said to Ike, do you remember this photograph being taken? He said, this is 75 years ago. And he said to me, I remember it like yesterday. And there are moments like that for myself where the importance of spending time with these guys, suddenly it's not a photograph that's in Martin Gilbert's fantastic book. It's not a photograph that's you see it printed in the newspaper. You're suddenly with somebody, and suddenly these things leap off the page. They're not in a book anymore. They become very, very real, and they give you a different feeling. I remember talking to Maurice Helfgott. Maurice is one of the sons of Ben, and Maurice said to me many years ago he grew up with these stories until he was, I think, 14, and his father took him to Piotrków, which is where quite a number of the boys came. That's where his father came from. And he said, when I went there and I suddenly saw the mill that his father owned where he worked, he said, suddenly, even me, as a child growing up at 14, suddenly it left the history books and became very real. And that's why I always feel very, very, I value time spent with any of them, any of the boys and the girls. So yeah, any questions from anybody?
What was the setup that got you out of Windermere and into ordinary life, for want of a better word?
Well, what was the setup? They tried to show us a way. You see, we must remember, because when we came out of the camps, we were like animals. All we wanted to do is survive. We haven't got a mother, we haven't got a father. We've got nobody in the world. We had to try and make a life for ourselves. We couldn't rely on our parents to help us alone. And the one thing we were determined is to go on and show and tell people what can happen in life, even nowadays. That if we don't watch out for anti-Semitism and hate and disrespect to other people, it can happen. It can. And we've got to try and tell people about these things. And hopefully we can save some humans in the end.
Can I ask you, Ike, about when you grew up, your childhood?
Yeah.
Did you, when you grew up, was there a level of, were you aware of anti-Semitism as a child? You know, did it?
There was. Because I remember when I used to start Polish school, and of course, there was no tram club, we had to walk several miles to go to school. And Polish boys, it was mixed, Jewish and Christians and all that. But any opportunity that they had to try and either kick your feet from under you or call you Jews, go to Palestine, it was always that feeling that Polish people originally, I would people were church-going people, were Christian people, they were going to church and all that. But the church was teaching them that the Jews had killed our Jesus. The bloody hell, what did it have to do with me? Why do you hate me? But they went to war to hate us. If you saw a boy on this side of the road, you used to have to run on the other side in case he'll kick your feet from under you or give you a good hiding. The rest of it was, they hated the Jews, and it made the Jewish people be fearful naturally. And yet some of the boys, when it came to Passover time, they demanded you bring the matzah. Because they've been brought up that way. And that is where it all starts. Putting things in young children's head. And it's an ongoing hate-mongering. It was bad. We used to have to bribe them, give them sweets, or a few coppers, to leave you alone. Children about the same age. He ate one another. And that is where it all starts. Young children. You've got to pass this on to the young children. That as parents, watch out for these sort of things, because it can soon turn everything upside down.
When you arrived at Windermere, what were your first impressions of the area? What were your memories of the first days?
In Windermere?
At Windermere, yes.
Well, on the way I can describe it, paradise. It was paradise for us. We've never thought, first of all, that we ever lived to see this, which is in itself a miracle. But I saw reality here, and we saw all these good people with grass, beautiful green pastures around you, and it was a miracle. It was a miracle to see. And the people were so good, so helpful. It was a change from all the hate, and all the beatings, and all the fear that we've been through.
Thank you.
So when you got in the aircraft, did you know where you were going? When they put you on the aircraft?
Yes,
Did
yes.
they tell you where you were going?
Yeah. The aircraft, the Lancaster bombers, we'd never been in an aircraft prior to that. The Lancaster bombers wanted to strip everything out, and we were all sat on the floor. Yeah. As far as going to England, what did I know about England? We're going, please God, to a new beginning. And from there, some of us have been very successful, others have struggled, but that's life. And thankfully, I managed to, I found an auntie, I believe, that she emigrated to Brazil in 1932-33. The reason why I'm saying that, because I've just come to me. And I thought, well, I've got an auntie. I've got family. Because I knew she had three children, two girls and a boy. I remember an incident where a son used to pull me on the sledge in the snow, in the street. And all of a sudden they disappear. I'm going back many, many years. And I managed, I didn't know where she lived. Well, I knew that she emigrated into Brazil. She had a hard, terrible time. That's another story. And I thought, how can I find out? And somebody said to me, why don't you write to a committee from your original hometown that people emigrated to Canada? Why don't you write to them and see maybe they can help? Which I did. I can't write English. I could write a little bit in Yiddish that I learned in Jewish school. And within a very short time, I got a letter back. Yes, she's there. And she sent me $100. Which was a fortune in those days. So I made arrangements. I wasn't going to do the same job, blah, 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 blah. But I had quite a number of people in my family, on my father's side and mother's side, who were in the jewelry business before the war. And I used on the practical side, not shops. They used to manufacture or repair things. And I used, as a child, I was fascinated to watch them melt a little bit of gold to make another wedding ring. And well, that's what I want. I'm not going to be a mechanic now. I'm going to start finding a job in the jewelry business, which I did do. And I also, thankfully, decided I'm going to make my life here because I had a lot of trouble trying to go to Brazil because the authorities, every time you went to see the Brazilian council in Liverpool, put another spoke in the wheel, another spoke in the wheel. They weren't particular to let in Jewish people. So I said, I'm settled down. I started going out with a local girl. We got married. I've got two beautiful girls, got some children, and I started my own business in the end, in Manchester, in the jewelry trade. I was doing the jewelry repairs and remakes for most of the shops in town. That's it.
Like when you look back now and see how the world is today, anti-Semitism,
Yes,
it must upset you.
of course it
Nothing
does.
has changed.
I'm very fearful because God forbid my children, my grandchildren, and my friends' children, and God forbid if ever they have to go through this again. It's unthinkable. It's unthinkable.
I think I said at the last talk, we do an awful lot of work. We use, this is recorded today.
Excuse me.
Yeah. We do an awful lot of work. This talk is recorded. I think it's our third or fourth talk. Because we started 15 years ago, we began to interview not only the locals who lived here, but also the survivors themselves. And I said at that time, I wish we'd started a few years before, and then we could have interviewed a whole lot more of these survivors, and we'd have had a much more extensive archive. but I know one or two of the boys, I call them boys, they said we weren't ready to talk before. You know, that you actually, your timing, some did talk quite, I think Maya Hirsch was one of the first who was speaking, but it took certainly retirement and afterwards for them to be able to talk about it. But all these archives and files, we do a lot of work in schools. We do the Alfred Hoover Writing Award every year with young people across the whole country. And we also carry out some work with the PREVENT programme, the counter-terrorism PREVENT programme. We had a meeting here just a month ago with the frontline team that deal with young people at risk of turning into terrorism. And that could be, I'm not going to say what kind of terrorism, from whatever extreme you want to think of. And we had a guy from Lancashire and Preston and from Cumbria. And we did have a success story, if you could say that, and it's something we're quite proud of, that a good while ago they contacted, could they bring a young person who is at risk of falling into bad company? Could they bring him here to this modest exhibition? Because they felt it might be good to take him away from that environment, but also take him away from a police kind of institution, education institution. So they came here, they sat in here, and we closed the exhibition to the public so they could bring him in on his own. And he looked at this exhibition, this side, he looked at this side, he saw the film, and he'd never met a Jewish person before. He'd never seen one before, never met one. And he saw the film. They then took him outside onto the lawns outside, and apparently it threw him so much because he was spewing anti-Semitism, or had been. They took him into the garden outside, and so we spent a few hours out there talking it all through. We then contacted Beth Shalom, Nottingham, we took him there as well. And after 18 months or 2 years, through seeing the boy's story and seeing some of our work in this and Beth Shalom, they said they were happy to say that they'd taken him off the programme, but they were monitoring him. And it's quite remarkable, I think, as Ike said there, that this chap had taken on lots and lots of extremist tropes and things, but he'd never met a Jewish person. He didn't know where he came from. We're now working with the Anne Frank Trust, the CEO, and they're doing work now with us, and they're looking at west coast of Cumbria to do work over there, and I think Carlisle. This poisonous anti-Semitism is not just found in, it's found in London and in big cities, but it's pervading much deeper into society, into, we know in our experience in Cumbria, into the places you'd never expect to find it. We've had a couple of incidents in Windermere village itself. Sadly, I think a lot of it is driven by social media, keyboard warriors we call them, and you don't know where this stuff is coming from. But we do, for all that side of it, we get tens of thousands of visitors here now every year. We'll be expanding next year because we can't cope with the numbers. The comments book, we used to take 2 or 3 years, we're filling a comments book a year. We're getting so many more schools involved, so many more young people. And this, as Ike said, we have to start with the youngsters, with the children. And we have to sort of almost get to the children before they've got at. It's almost, we don't really want to be thinking, we have a problem at this school, would you come? Actually, we need to get in before then to lay the groundwork, before that even starts, which is a comprehensive, we're only a small organisation, but there are lots of small organisations like ourselves doing this. But we can only do it by, I can tell second-hand stories, anecdotes. We can only do it from, this is filmed and recorded this film is then shown in school, or it's shown, we do programs like this, because nothing beats the effect on, for young children on hearing it coming out of the horse's mouth, so to speak. And I've known for a long time, what it manages to do is to challenge that for a lot of young people, this happened a long time ago in a galaxy far away. And there's a sense, I think, a couple of things I'd like to say. A lot of people, older people, think they know about the Holocaust, but I don't think they do. They think they do. And a lot of people, we have it here, think that when the survivors, you know, that's the end of the story. It's condensed, we can leave it to history now, we move on. But actually, we don't, because we've got the children, we've got the grandchildren. And not just of the Jewish community, it's for all our children. It's for everybody's children, everybody's grandchildren. And I myself, Rosemary, those attached to this, we couldn't do what little we've managed to do in the scale of it without, I know what Ike and Sam and these guys go through when they tell this story. And it's our duty to use that in the schools.
It's not just for Jewish people. I'm doing this. I go around. As far as I'm concerned, it's a human being I'm speaking to. We're all human beings. Why should we get to hate one another?
I tell an interesting story. When I give the talk, when one of the boys, I give a talk in a shul or in front of a Jewish audience, and many times somebody in the audience will say to me, "Why do you do this? You're not Jewish." And if you flip that around, I will also give a talk in what you would call a Christian audience, i.e. non-Jewish audience. And somebody in this audience will say to me, "Why do you do this? You're not Jewish." And it just begs the question to me that we've all got to do it. We shouldn't be expecting somebody else to do it. The onus shouldn't be on anybody else to be doing this. Everybody. And as I said, I struggle at times in a sense because I see them as Ike and Sam and you know Ben. The Jewishness is, I know it's part of the Holocaust story, but I see them as people first. They're just people. They're just people. And I, for the life of me, as much as I look into it, I can't wave a magic wand. People often say to me, "Why did it happen?" I have no idea. But I know it's hatred that's at the heart of it. And I know, having been to Poland myself a few times, this thing about what young people are taught. I can give instances where there'll be a local priest, and you can go to a town where some of the boys came from, and if the local priest has done a lot of work recognising what went on in that town, then you would get a great welcome. And it would be as simple as, could you tell me where the Jewish community lived? Could you tell me where the Jewish cemetery was from this time? And then we'll help straight away. I've been to another community where you say the same thing and they say, "Don't know what you're talking about." I haven't a clue. And the lead taken from the teachers at the top, from the priest or whatever, is enormous. And it's what they're led, it's what they're taught, and what's preached from the pulpit or from the schools, which is why, again, we're back to schools. It comes from people are led, you know, from what they're taught. And that's why it's so important to get into schools.
I mean, I go to schools and I go to the high schools and that, for instance, in Manchester, the grammars 250 boys there, and they're all. And the headmaster made sure that when I finished and I answered questions, that they all come onto the stage, you know, and shook my hand. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I want to see the tattoo. And I feel that I achieved something. And I'll go on doing it until I can.
Anybody got one of that? Anybody with any last question?
All right, thank you very much for your story. I am a teacher and very conscious of the trauma that you have suffered, but also young people still do from various parts of the world. And I wondered if you have some idea of what you think helps people, and I'm going to use the word cautiously, recover, because I accept that we perhaps never recover from some things, but what helped you recover?
So I didn't go.
What helped you in your recovery?
What helped me? It's because I've suffered. It's because I suffered. And sometimes you got to suffer to know and to help others.
What helped you?
Sorry?
What helped you?
What helped me? The fact that I proved that we can help other people. That's what helped me to overcome, because for years and years I could not face an audience or even talk about it with a single person about it, because for years and years and years people couldn't understand what these Nazis did. They couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe the things that happened to us. That other human beings can do that to you. How? I mean, well, we've got some young people here as well, and I can't go deeply into this because I don't want to give young people nightmares. I've got a lot more up here, and I daren't talk about for fear of upsetting. I've got photographs that you wouldn't believe. You wouldn't believe some of the atrocities. And that what keeps me going now is to try, while I'm still alive. See, I'm not 25 anymore. And it took me, unfortunately, it took me all these years, but I knew some other people were doing it for me. And unfortunately, I've recently lost one of the survivors, Sam Gondas, who going back all these years, we've been friends, not only friends, we've been brothers, because we didn't have any other family. So we gelled with the people that we've been through, and that's what kept us going. And people, they simply wouldn't believe some of the atrocities. That one human being can do this to another human being, all because of hate.
I think it's okay if we can draw this part to a close, but we can, there are cups of tea across the corridor into the rooms next door. You're welcome to join for a cup of tea and a cup of coffee and biscuits. Ike does have some photographs. I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to people privately. I think this stage is over. I'd like to publicly really very much thank Ike for coming here and doing this for us today.